各位贵宾，我们的活动即将开始，请入座。活动开始前，请各位先将手机调整为震动，感谢您的配合。
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please welcome Professor Alvin Roth to National Tsinghua University. All right. I would like to invite all of you to be seated and switch your mobile phones to silent mode. Thank you for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear professors, and students from NTHU, good afternoon. Welcome to today's keynote speech delivered by Professor Alvin Roth, 2012 Nobel Peace Prize laureate in Economic Sciences. This lecture is part of Taiwan Bridges event series. It is our great honor to have you all here today. To officially begin this event, we are honored to have with us President John Cao of National Tsinghua University. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming President Cao to deliver his remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to NTHU. It's such an honor and pleasure to welcome a Nobel laureate to our campus. Actually, the relationship of Nobel laureates and NTHU can be traced back to more than about 20 years to this year. And since then, we had the privilege of hosting almost 50 Nobel laureates in all disciplines to come to campus and share their stories and experiences with all of us. So we're very fortunate to be able to work with the Bridge Foundation this time to welcome Alvin to come and share with us a very interesting topic. Now, of course, NTHU had our own share of Nobel laureates. We had 3 in our past alum in physics and chemistry. So what we would like to emphasize is our core belief of academic freedom and interdisciplinary collaborations. And we also firmly believe in diversity, inclusivity, and equality. And I think Alvin's talk today will highlight this by sharing with us the intersection between economics, medicine, public policies, ethics, philosophy, and so many more. And I think that is the magic ingredient of success for Nobel laureate, is to have this free and open environment where disciplines can come together and really tackle challenging questions. So with that, let's welcome Dr. Alvin Roth to our campus, and I personally look forward to his sharing. Thank you.
To express our enthusiastic welcome and sincere appreciation, we have prepared a commemorative gift for Professor Alvin Roth. Please join me in giving him Professor Alvin Roth. We now invite President Cao to present the gift featuring the Chinese character Qing, symbolizing National Tsinghua University, as a token of our deep appreciation. We would also like to invite President Cao and Professor Roth to take a group photo together to capture this special moment. At this special moment, we would like to invite all distinguished guests, faculty members, and students to join Professor Roth for a group photograph. May we also invite Professor Roth and President Cao to return to the audience area and join the group photo. Next, please join me in welcoming our host, Professor Po Shunshi from National Tsinghua University, National Chain Professor and Tsinghua Distinguished Chair Professor, who will introduce our speaker.
Is it on? Okay, great. First of all, on behalf of National Tsinghua University, I would like to welcome everyone to join this great event. I'm Paul from College of Technology Management. On behalf of the university, we are truly honored to be able to learn from Professor Alvin Elliott Roth speech today. Let me introduce our Nobel laureate speaker to the floor first so you can get some background information. Professor Roth is a Craig and Susan McCall Professor of Economics at the Stanford University, and he is also the George Gang Professor Emeritus of Economics and Business Administration at Harvard University, who shared 2012 Nobel Prize in Economics for the theory of stable allocations and the practice of market design. Professor Roth received his bachelor's degree in operation research from Columbia University and his master and PhD degree also in operation research from Stanford University in the early 70s. In his early career, Professor Roth worked out not only quantitative methods and published in operation journal, but also many applications to economics, insurance, accounting, and the psychology journal. Professor Roth made a tremendous contribution to the matching and allocation mechanism designs, which can be applied to a wide range of human activities, including marriage, schooling, job search, college admissions, organ donation, and auctions. In addition to publishing at the academic journal, Professor Roth has also led several important policy initiatives based on his research. I will just mention two most important ones based on my own study. The first one is apparently the redesign of a national resident matching program in the 90s to design medical school students to help them to find their first job in hospitals. The second is a New England program for kidney exchange. He helped to found it in 2004 to match kidney donors, which allow matched families to donate kidneys to their family members, which save a lot of families, as you can imagine. So this has now become the standard form of transplantation in not only the United States, but gradually adopted around the world. In fact, I have got a chance to read many Professor Roth's representative papers, and I got to learn he always motivated his papers by first throwing out the real world problems, and then developed theoretical solution for such issues. Such an approach really impressed me and remind me of a sentence I learned when I was a college student from my professor, which I would like to share with all of you. The sentence says the following: Nothing is more practical than theory. 就中文来说呢，就是说没有比理论更实务的东西了。Let's welcome Professor Roth.
Hear me? Yep. Can you hear me now? Good. Very good. Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for the nice introductions, and it's very nice to be here with you. My wife and I, this is our first visit to Taiwan, so we're enjoying ourselves. And what I want to tell you about today is a couple of different things. I want to tell you about kidney transplantation and the role that economics and market design play in that. But before I do, I should tell you something about markets and about market design. So I wrote a book some years ago, 2015, on market design, and was translated into Chinese. And it turns out books can be translated into lots of languages. This book was. And the reason I mention that is that languages are human artifacts. They're tools that human beings make to communicate with each other. And markets are also tools that human beings make to coordinate and cooperate and compete with each other. And often we don't think about language as an artifact. We think, we speak the language we were taught when we were children, more or less the way we were taught it. But of course, languages change over time. We use lots of words today that didn't exist when I was a child, words related to the internet or to artificial intelligence or to cryptocurrency. These are all new words that we know what they mean now because it's become useful to redesign parts of the language to accommodate technological change. And the same thing with markets. Okay, markets are tools that we make to coordinate with each other. And there's not just one kind of market, just as there are lots of natural languages that books can be translated into, there are lots of different kinds of markets. And often when people think about markets, including economists, we think about commodity markets. And I'm not going to talk to you today about commodity markets, but let me just remark what they are and how they're different from what I am going to talk to you about. Commodity markets, you don't care who you're dealing with, right? When you buy shares of Microsoft on the New York Stock Exchange, you don't care who owned those shares, who is selling them to you, and the seller doesn't care who's buying them. You don't worry if they took good care of those shares while they had them, and they don't worry about your taking care of them. And prices do all the work. All the shares of Microsoft on the New York Stock Exchange are the same, so you don't care which shares you get. You can offer a price, and anyone who wants to take that price can accept it and sell to you, right? So if we were all participants in a commodity market and I wanted to buy something, I would be offering to buy it from any one of you. And each of you offering to sell it would be as happy to sell it to me as to anyone else. But so prices do all the work. The job of a commodity market is price discovery to get the prices at which supply equals demand at each moment in the day throughout the day for each security or each bundle of wheat or whatever that you're buying on the commodity market. Okay, but in many markets, you care who you're dealing with, right? In a labor market, you don't just say, we want to hire a professor at National Tsinghua University, here's the price, here's the wage, and anyone who wants to take that wage can come, right? When you hire professors at Tsinghua University, you hire specific individuals into specific departments, and the university cares who they hire, who they make an offer to, and the professors care about the university, which university they might go to. So prices don't do all the work, and there are some, although there are wages, right? We pay professors a wage. And in some matching markets, and I'm going to talk to you about one today where we talk about kidneys, in some matching markets, we don't even let prices do any of the work. So matching markets are sort of special. They need other institutions to clear the market because Harvard and Stanford, the universities where I've most recently taught, don't raise tuition until just enough applicants remain to fill the seats, right? You can't decide by yourself to study at Harvard or Stanford, even if you can afford the tuition, you have to be admitted. So there's a whole process of applications and interviews and essays and exams, as there is here in Taiwan. And the tuition, which is expensive actually in the United States, is still low enough so that many people would like to come and study at Stanford. Okay, so these are markets where prices alone don't do all the work, right? There are other institutions we have to study. And that makes labor markets and college admissions more than a little bit like marriage. You have to court your spouse, and you can't just choose your spouse, you also have to be chosen. And that's really the feature of matching markets. You can't just choose what you want, even if you can afford it, you also have to be chosen. And one of the jobs of the marketplace is to help that matching process happen, okay, which isn't needed in a commodity market, right? When you're buying Microsoft shares, you don't care who you're buying from. When you're marrying, you care a lot who you're marrying, okay? And of course, it's a two-sided matching market, right? You can't just decide to study at Harvard, you have to be admitted, and Harvard can't just decide who should study there, they have to compete with Stanford, with Berkeley, with lots of other universities around the world. So choices have to be made on both sides. That's part of what's involved in matching. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about market design. And market design is an engineering part of economics. And engineering is a little bit different than mathematics or science because it's more contingent. So the things I'm going to tell you today about kidneys are ways we are trying to do things now. But in 20 years, we'll try to do things in a different way because technology will have moved on and we'll try to adapt to that. Okay? So let's think for a little bit about how engineering is different than theory in economics and in other things as well. Okay? And again, as I said, the solutions I tell you about today aren't meant to be eternal, they're meant to be contingent. So that's different than mathematics. Okay, let's think about Pythagoras' theorem, which studies right triangles. It studies ancient triangles and modern right triangles, and it studies triangles in ancient Greece and in the United States and in Taiwan and in China long ago. And so it doesn't matter who taught us about Pythagoras' theorem, the theorem is the same, right? Triangles are all the same. But that's not true for engineering artifacts. So for instance, here's a bridge, a Ming Dynasty bridge, so hundreds of years old, but it's been maintained right across the strait in Fujian province. And it must be a great bridge because it's still standing, it's been able to be maintained for 500 years. But that isn't the way bridges are built today, even though it was a great bridge. So here's another bridge, which I understand is just opening up soon, next month. And this weekend there were bicycle riders on it. So brand new bridge, looks very different than the 500-year-old bridge, but it serves a different purpose. It spans a much larger body of water. It's made of different materials. It's expected to carry much more traffic, right? This will be a good bridge too. And it's not any criticism of the old bridge that the new bridge is now made in different ways. So some of the things I'm going to tell you today, you should hear in that spirit, that they're engineering solutions to contemporary problems. And we hope in the future to have even better solutions than the ones I'm going to tell you about. Because what I want to talk to you, what I want to talk to you today is how marketplaces are engineering solutions to economic problems. And I'm going to be a little casual. I'm often a little casual when I speak about marketplaces or markets. But loosely speaking, when I speak about a marketplace, I'm speaking about a small part of a big economic environment, right? So when I talk about labor markets, there might be specific labor market clearinghouses that help the labor market work. When you talk about college admissions, there are specific ways that people get into college in different places. But those are part of those are marketplaces that are part of a larger labor market or part of an education market. And the education market is a part of a larger economy. So the things that we as economic engineers get to design are often these marketplaces that exist in larger economic environments. Okay? And marketplaces have a couple of jobs that they have to do to make markets work well. One of the things that marketplaces have to do is help the market become thick, bring enough people together so that going to the marketplace is the right place to be to find the transaction you want. So if we're talking about college admissions, there should be lots of colleges involved in the same admission system and lots of students. When we're talking about kidneys, which I'm going to do today, you want to get lots of patients and donors involved in a coherent way with each other. Now, once a market becomes thick, it starts to potentially experience congestion. That is, if all of us are engaged in some matching market and we have to find who we'll match with in this big room, it would be hard without any technology to help us, right? Because if you had to meet each person in the room and make some decision about whether you should match to each other, that would be hard because there are so many of us in this room. But lots of what matching markets do is produce tools to help with congestion. So think about buying things on the internet from Amazon or Taobao or I'm blocking on a name for one of the popular Taiwan internet websites. But they have lots of things you can buy on the internet. But if they were just listed in alphabetical order, it would be very hard to find anything. So instead, you have search engines built into the marketplace that help you find what you want, because there are lots of possible transactions, and you have to focus on the ones you want. So one of the things we see in internet marketplaces is powerful search functions that help you deal with what would otherwise be congestion. And then marketplaces have to be safe in various ways, because people have to reveal their private information. Loosely speaking, the way economists think about markets is markets are ways of aggregating private information. We all come to the market knowing, we all come to the marketplace knowing something about what we want. That's private information. No one else really knows what you want. Although in some markets and marketplaces, it's clearer than others. So lately, there have been markets and marketplaces for transportation like Uber. And Uber has a pretty good idea of what you want. When you open your app, you want a car that's close to you. But there are other marketplaces like Airbnb where it's much harder to infer what people want, because people want different places to live, different apartments. Location isn't enough. So an app like Airbnb has to show you lots of apartments, has to show you pictures so you can express your preferences among them. So being able to express your preferences is part of the safety of the marketplace, being able to know that the prices you face and the options you face won't necessarily change in ways that work against you as you express your preferences. Okay, so I've actually had an opportunity to design a number of different kinds of matching marketplaces. And let me briefly say a few words about them, and then focus on what I want to talk to you about today, which is kidney exchange. Okay, so as was already mentioned, I've done some work on labor markets, and one of the first labor markets I got a chance to help design was the market for new American physicians, new American doctors. And when American doctors graduate from medical school, their first job is what's called a residency. And residency is an important part. It's called postgraduate medical education. It's an important part of the education and labor force participation of American doctors, because American doctors aren't licensed to practice medicine until they've finished a residency. So it's an unusual market in the sense that essentially everyone who graduates from medical school wants the same kind of job. So all the medical graduates and many graduates of foreign medical schools go through a centralized clearinghouse that now uses an algorithm that I designed to try to match them to residencies. And that solves problems of both thickness and congestion that used to bedevil that market. And in particular, what used to happen before these clearinghouses was hospitals, residency programs, would make offers to medical students sometimes years before they graduated, right? Because there was competition for medical students, and they would advance earlier and earlier. And so sometimes medical students, at some point in the history of this market, medical students were getting offers 2 years before they graduated, which is too early for residency programs to identify which new doctors would be most qualified to work for them. And it was also too early for doctors to know what kind of medicine they wanted to practice. And so gradually that market moved to a particular time, but without a centralized clearinghouse. And then they found that lots of offers had to be considered very quickly. And so there was a time at which residency programs were making offers to doctors that were exploding offers. You would be on the market for being a resident, and your phone would ring, and some place you had interviewed would offer you a job, and you'd say, "That's wonderful. How long can I think about this?" And they'd say, "You know, in previous years we gave people time to think about it, and when they said no to us, we found that all the other people we wanted to hire had already taken jobs. So this year, we would like you to, I'm happy to answer any questions you have on the phone, but you have to answer yes or no while we're talking to each other on the phone." Okay, so that wasn't a very comfortable market to be in either. And now there's a clearinghouse, and the clearinghouse has the property that all the doctors and all the employers, all the residency programs, submit rank order lists. This is my first choice, my second choice, my third choice of jobs and of graduating doctors. And then the algorithm puts together all those matches in a way that makes people want to take them. So it has some mathematical properties that say you can't do better than your match by going outside of the match. And it has some safety properties saying you don't you have to reveal your preferences, and it's safe to do so. You can put down your rank order, you can put down true preferences. Okay, so labor markets are matching markets, and I've worked in some of those. And a similar set of problems arises in school choice in a bunch of American cities. Here we go. So in a bunch of American cities, there's a question of which students should go to which schools. And loosely speaking, in these cities that I've named here, New York and Boston and then some other cities, we now use something that both procedurally and mathematically is pretty similar to what I just told you about for American doctors. Okay, and in American cities, there's no problem with thickness because, at least on the side of students, because the law requires students to go to school until they're a certain age, different in different states. But there was a problem with congestion. There are a lot of schools, a lot of applications. A centralized clearinghouse helps that work smoothly. And the clearinghouse I'm going to talk to you about today is also an important one. And it's important for Taiwan too, because there's a lot of kidney failure in Taiwan. Right? Taiwan is one of the places with a high incidence of end-stage renal disease. And I want to talk to you about how we think about enhancing the accessibility of kidney transplant in the United States and some other places in the world now. Okay, so that's the topic of my talk today, now that I've introduced market design. And I want to talk about kidney transplants in the US and around the world, and what I understand of the Taiwan situation. And I am not an expert on Taiwan, so I've inferred what I can from the sometimes scarce data that's available about transplantation in Taiwan. Okay, so kidney failure, end-stage renal disease, is a big cause of death everywhere in the world. And transplantation is the treatment of choice. Okay, so one of the best way we know to treat kidney failure is to transplant a kidney either from a very recently deceased person or from a living donor. Turns out kidneys are special because one of the ways kidneys are special is that healthy people have two kidneys and can remain healthy with one kidney. So if you love someone who's suffering from kidney failure, which is a lethal disease, you might be able to help extend their life a great deal by donating a kidney, if you're healthy enough to give a kidney, and we'll talk about that. Okay. Now, every now and then, especially some years ago, I've been working on kidney transplantation for almost since the turn of the century, so for about 25 years now. And in the early days, people would say, what an odd thing for economists to be interested in. Why are economists interested in this part of medicine? And the answer is, it seems to me and to many economists, very natural that we should be interested in kidney transplants, because economics is concerned with how to allocate scarce resources well, equitably and efficiently, and also how to make them less scarce. And kidneys for transplantation are very scarce. I'll tell you about it, but loosely speaking, almost everyone who needs a kidney will die without getting one. Okay, so it's a very scarce resource. It's a very valuable resource. It's a natural place for economists to come in and think about how to allocate it and make them less scarce, how to increase the availability of transplants. Okay, so just a very little bit of history. The first kidney transplant, the first successful organ transplant of any sort, was a kidney transplant with a living donor giving to his identical twin in 1954. And Joseph Murray later won the Nobel Prize for that and his subsequent work on transplantation. And the reason identical twins were important in the success of the first transplant was kidneys have to be well matched to their recipient. And identical twins, kidneys are well matched. So part of what Dr. Murray got the Nobel Prize for was his subsequent work on making it possible for people who aren't identical twins to get kidneys from each other, to deal with the immune system and how to suppress the rejection reaction that people's bodies have for a foreign object like a kidney. Okay? And of course, I think the first successful organ transplant, but certainly the first successful kidney transplant in Asia was done here in Taiwan in 1968. And it was also a living donor transplant. So here's a picture of transplantation around the world, and it's a little out of date. I'm gonna update it for you, but this one is a 2021 picture in which I don't have Taiwan, and I'll tell you about that in a moment too. But remember, there's two ways to get a kidney for transplant. One is from a dead person, a recently deceased person. So I say recently deceased, I mean immediately in the previous 24 hours or thereabouts, or from a living donor. And what this picture does, this is a picture that transplant professionals often like to look at because it seems to talk about the efficiency of transplantation in each country. This is kidneys transplanted per million population. It's a couple of years old, but it's not too different from the current picture, which I'll also show you. So the blue line is deceased donor transplants per million population, and the orange line is living donor transplants per million population. What you see is a lot of countries with the highest rates of transplant primarily do deceased donor transplants. But then there are countries like, do I have Israel here? That's one I'm familiar with. There are countries, well, there's India, which does almost entirely living donor transplants. Okay, so different medical organizations are able to do different kinds of transplants at different kinds of scale. Okay, and this is per million population. So countries like China and India, which have very large populations, don't necessarily have high per million population. But if we look at the total number of kidneys transplanted in a country, China and India move right up to the top, right there. The US is still first, but China is second and India is third for total transplants because big countries have many millions of people. So when we start talking about a thick market, we might, by the end of my talk, start to think about countries that do lots of transplants. Okay, and those aren't necessarily the ones that do transplants at the highest rate per million population. Okay, now, here I was coming to Taiwan, and so I wanted an updated graph. This is gonna be 2024, which is the latest data that I had. And I asked a large language model, I asked Gemini to help me compose the data. And one reason I needed to compose the data was that the Taiwan data is a little hard to get from the World Health Organization, which has trouble seeing Taiwan as a country. So in their list of countries, Taiwan is you can't find it. I couldn't find it. But the Global Observatory on Donation and Transplantation has Taiwan information. And what you see, this is the per million population, not the total graph. And Taiwan is, not near the very top, but it appears not to be too bad. On the other hand, one of the things I found, and I left it in here in order to tell you about it, is Gemini gave me a number that's almost exactly twice the actual number for Taiwan. Okay, and as near as I can tell, the reason it made that error, here's the actual data that I find from the International Registry on Organ Donation and Transplantation. When you look at kidney donation, the per million population of living kidneys is around 8, and of deceased kidneys is around 10 per million population. Incidentally, so that's 18. And when you look at livers, which is not what I was looking for, you get 13 plus 6, which is another 18. And I think that's the number that Gemini gave me. It gave me the combined liver and kidney. So artificial intelligence is great stuff. Be careful when you use it. Sometimes it tells you things different than what you were asking. Okay? And similarly, here's total number of kidney transplants with Taiwan. Again, it's got about twice as many. So Taiwan is actually at the bottom of this graph. And I say that to point out that Taiwan is not gonna have a naturally thick market for transplants. So here's a paper that gives a 2026 update on the data for Taiwan, and it says Taiwan faces a critical organ shortage. Over 8,500 patients are awaiting kidney transplants. You only do 430 a year. Okay, so Taiwan, like everywhere else in the world, is not doing enough kidney transplants to take care of its patients. Okay, and indeed, Taiwan Here's a paper from 2022 saying that Taiwan has the highest incidence and prevalence of end-stage kidney disease worldwide. Okay, so there's a shortage, a serious shortage of kidney transplants in Taiwan. But Taiwan is far from alone at that. When I showed you those worldwide country figures for per million and for total transplants, you saw that the United States was at the top of both. So you might think that maybe the US is doing a good job, but it's not. We're also not doing a good job. We have about 130,000 new cases per year of kidney failure. And there are presently over 500,000 people on dialysis in the United States. Dialysis is saves lives for some years, but it's not a nice treatment, and it's not nearly as good as transplant. Not nearly as good as transplant, both in that the expected longevity on dialysis is only 5 years, average, a lot of variance. But also dialysis is much more expensive than transplantation. So in terms of public health policy, we'd really like to be transplanting people, not dialyzing them. And part of the reason is in many places, I don't have Taiwan figures, but in the United States and in many places, a year on dialysis costs about as much as a transplant. But after a year of dialysis, you need another year of dialysis. And after a transplant, you don't. So there's lots of reasons to think we need more transplants, not merely, but most importantly, because it will save lots of lives. Okay, so here we are, we have 500,000 people, more than that on dialysis, 130,000 new cases a year in the United States, but we only do 21,000 deceased donor transplants a year and 6,500 living donor transplants. So we have 130,000 new cases a year, but we only do fewer than 30,000 transplants a year. So most people who will need a transplant in the United States, in Taiwan, everywhere in the world, will not get one, will die without getting one. Okay, so, and it's not just a problem in rich countries. Millions of people die worldwide from kidney disease. Okay, now when economists see long waiting lists, right, there's 100,000 people on the waiting list for kidney transplant in the United States, and there would be many more on the waiting list if being on the waiting list had a better chance of giving you a transplant. We worry that, there must be something that's not working, and one thing that sometimes works to increase supply is the price mechanism. But it turns out paying a living donor for a kidney is illegal almost everywhere in the world. Also, in most of the world, but not in Taiwan, paying expenses for deceased donors is illegal. But the single exception about living donors is the Islamic Republic of Iran, where there's a state-sanctioned market for kidneys. On another day, I could tell you much more about that. Okay, so here's a piece of the American law. It says it's unlawful for any person to knowingly transfer any human organ for valuable consideration for use in transplantation. Okay, and so the question is, how can we, for the moment, at any moment in time, the question is, in keeping with the law, how can we increase the accessibility of transplants in the United States? Right? Gary Becker, the late Nobel Prize winner in economics from Chicago, used to say to me, there's no shortage of kidneys, everyone has two. There's a problem with the price mechanism. And indeed there is, but these are problems that we have to take into account as we try to make incremental improvement. Okay, and it's not just the US. Here's a statement from the Council of Europe, the human body and its parts shall not as such give rise to financial gain. And that causes many countries to also not be so generous to families of deceased donors, of which Taiwan is an exception, right? So the Taiwan law, as I understand it, is that funeral subsidies can be paid for deceased donors, funeral subsidies of 100,000 new Taiwan dollars. So that's a step towards making transplants more accessible, but they're still not very accessible in Taiwan, partly because the restrictions on who can give a kidney to whom are very severe in Taiwan, right? So in Taiwan, I cannot give you a kidney, even if I love you. Only a member of your appropriately defined family can give you a kidney. Okay, so that's something to think about too, about the shortage in Taiwan. Okay, but now let me tell you about kidney exchange, because sometimes someone in your family or someone who you love is dying of kidney disease, and you would like to give them a kidney because you love them, and you're healthy enough to give a kidney. Not everyone is, so there's a careful screening process to make sure intended donors are healthy. But still, you might not be able to give the person you want to give a kidney to a kidney because it's a matching market. Your kidney has to match theirs. It has to be compatible in various medical ways, and it might not be. Okay? So kidney exchange is meant to overcome those incompatibilities. So here we have a picture of donor 1 loves recipient 1 and would like to give her a kidney, but they have incompatible blood types. Turns out blood types are not the most serious kind of incompatibility, but they're the easiest to show on a slide like this. And donor 2 would like to give recipient 2 a kidney, but can't because recipient 2 needs a blood type A kidney, and that's not what donor 2 has. But you can see from the picture that we need a blood type B kidney and a blood type A kidney, and we have them. So a kidney exchange is an exchange of kidneys between 2 patient-donor pairs so that each patient gets a compatible kidney from another patient's donor, another patient's intended donor. So that's kidney exchange. Okay, now remember, I just showed you the piece of the National Organ Transplant Act, the American law, which says you can't give valuable consideration for a human organ. So you might look at kidney exchange and think, that sure looks like valuable consideration. You know, a kidney is being donated. And so we started doing kidney exchange in the US around the year 2000. It wasn't until some years later that 2007 that Congress passed an amendment to the National Organ Transplant Act, which says the preceding sentence, that sentence on the left, doesn't apply with respect to human organ paired donation. And paired donation turns out to be a term of art for kidney exchange. It keeps the word exchange out of the law, but what it means is kidney exchange. And so 7 years after we started doing kidney exchange in the US, the law was amended to make clear that it's legal. Okay, so it's legal in the US. And if you've been following American politics, you know how rare it today would be to have a law passed unanimously. Okay, no one voted no on this. So the people who object to paying for kidneys in the United States, paying the donor, don't object to kidney exchange. And it turns out kidney exchange is also legal in Taiwan. Okay, here's a 2019 law which says that it's legal. The regulations for the administration of living donor kidney exchange, donation, and transplant was passed to expand the accessibility of kidney transplants. Okay, now my understanding is that although it's legal in principle, very few kidney exchange transplants have happened in Taiwan. Okay, so there are still complications about who is allowed to donate to whom, and maybe other complications that from my great distance I don't fully understand. But that's something to think about. And one of them is, who can give a kidney to whom? But another thing to think about is the logistics of kidney exchange, because it turns out it can be a market that gets congested. So here's a picture of half of a simple kidney exchange between just 2 pairs, like I showed you. Okay, so here's the kidney. There I am in the yellow gown, keeping my hands out of the way so no one hands me anything. And the kidney is going into this gentleman. And at the same time, this is in Cincinnati, Ohio, and at the same time in Toledo, Ohio, the other half of the exchange is going on. And when I say at the same time, I mean literally at the same time. This surgeon is a man named Steve Whittle, and after the operation had been prepared, after they were ready in Cincinnati, he called up Mike Reese in Toledo, who's doing the other half, supervising the other half, and he said, Mike, we're ready in Cincinnati. That is, we've successfully anesthetized both the donor and the recipient, and we've made the initial incisions, and everything has gone well, and we're now ready to do the nephrectomy, to take the kidney. Are you ready in Toledo? And when he's told that they are ready, then both nephrectomies happened and both transplants happened. And the reason they do them simultaneously is if you can't give valuable consideration for a kidney, that means you can't write a contract on a kidney. So doing it simultaneously makes sure that both parties that gave a kidney get a kidney. But what that means is that even this simple surgery, the simplest kind of kidney exchange between just 2 pairs, requires a lot of logistics. it requires 4 simultaneously available operating rooms and 4 simultaneously available surgical teams to do the 2 nephrectomies and 2 transplants, right? So it's hard to coordinate. And what that means is it's hard to scale up to a national scale how many transplants you can do through kidney exchange, okay? So one of the things we had to learn to do was non-simultaneous kidney exchanges. And it turns out in the United States, we have about 500 non-directed donors a year, kidney donors, living kidney donors, who want to give a kidney to someone and don't have a particular person in mind, right? So they feel moved to give someone a kidney because they know there's this terrible, deadly shortage. So I'm going to tell you about non-simultaneous chains, but first let me just emphasize for a moment why we do those simple exchanges that I've been talking about up to now, why we do them simultaneously. Suppose we didn't. This is a counterfactual. We always do these simultaneously. But suppose we didn't. So on day 1, donor 2 successfully gives a kidney to recipient 1. And so donor 2 this pair no longer has a kidney. They gave a kidney on day 1. And on day 2, for whatever reason, donor 1 fails to give a kidney as scheduled to recipient 2. That's a very bad outcome for pair 2 because they gave a kidney and didn't get one. They had a transplant that didn't help them, and they can't participate in kidney exchange anymore. They don't have a kidney to exchange. So we try to never let that happen. We do those simultaneously. But now suppose there's a non-directed donor who comes. Non-directed donor doesn't need a kidney in return, okay? So the non-directed donor can give a kidney to this pair before they've given a kidney, and if for whatever reason, same reason as in the previous picture, if donor 1 fails to give to recipient 2, that's very disappointing. But it's not tragic because donor 2 and recipient 2, they're still a patient-donor pair with a kidney to exchange, so they can participate in kidney exchange tomorrow or next week. Okay, so it makes the cost of a broken link much less costly, and therefore we can start to experiment with long chains. And indeed, some of the chains can be very long. Mike Reese, who's really one of the heroes of this story, he was the guy off camera in Toledo, Ohio. He organized the first non-simultaneous extended altruistic donor chain. And it had, at the time it ran, it had, I think, 20 people in the picture. And Helena McKinney, the last lady in the picture. Oh, so this is the picture in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is the subsequent picture in People magazine when they allowed themselves to be identified. And Helena McKinney, the last lady in the picture, she had blood type AB. So it was a mistake to ask her to wait because for various reasons, it takes a while to find an AB match in the kidney exchange pool. But we didn't know that. We didn't fully appreciate it at that time. So we asked her to wait, and I think she waited 3 years and was still willing and added another dozen people to the picture. So chains can do a lot of good work. Now, they were controversial originally, and many European kidney exchanges don't allow non-directed donors. But in the US, we get about half of our total kidney exchange transplants from chains started by non-directed donors. Okay, and why are chains so important, aside from the fact that they can be long and get a lot of transplants? It's because they help us match the hardest to match candidates. So here's a visualization of a snapshot of the data set from a kidney exchange that I work a lot with, blocking on the name, the Association of Paired Kidney Donation. And Mike Reese is the organizer of that. And the way to read this picture is each circle is a kidney patient-donor pair, a patient and a donor. And an arrow goes from one circle to another if the kidney of the donor in the first circle is compatible with the patient in the second circle. And what you see is there's just a small number, colored in blue, of pairs that are easy to match. They have a lot of compatible kidneys that they could get. And the rest are sort of hard to match. And in this picture, incidentally, everyone, all the donors and all the recipients have blood type A. So none of the incompatibilities here are due to blood type incompatibility. They're all due to antibody incompatibility, tissue type incompatibility, because human beings can develop antibodies to human proteins. And if you have antibodies to to my protein, then you can't take my kidney, essentially. Okay? So what you can see is this is not a very thick market, it's sort of a sparse market. And small countries or countries with small kidney exchange are going to have trouble matching lots of the people who won't find a match. It's easy to match these blue to each other. They're compatible. But it's sort of a waste to match them to each other because the way to match hard to match pairs is partly to match them with easy to match pairs. So often what you need is a big marketplace. Okay? And we do integer programming to find the right chains and things like that. So those of you who know about integer programming know that this can be a computationally hard problem. It's an NP hard problem. It has some very hard instances. It's not that there are never hard instances, but so far we've been able to solve all the problems. So for the computer scientists in the crowd, we need more guidance about average difficulty of problems, not just worst case difficulty. So here's the American statistics over time on kidney pair donation, on kidney exchange transplants, and in orange, the non-directed donors that begin the chains. And what you see is it's taken off over time, and we do about 30% of the living donor transplants in the US now happen through kidney exchange. So if we stopped here, I'd sort of have told you a story of victory after victory in ameliorating the shortage of kidneys. But I can't stop here because all those victories come in a war that we're losing. When I started studying kidney transplantation at the turn of the century, there were about 40,000 Americans on the waiting list for a transplant, and today there are about 100,000. And it's not that we haven't learned to do more transplant, it's that diabetes and other diseases that destroy kidneys are epidemic. So we need to find other things to do, okay? And one of the things to do, particularly around the world, of course, is not let national borders be hard barriers, right? So I already pointed out that in Taiwan, you don't have that many kidney transplants each year, and so you're not gonna be able to find that many kidney exchange transplants even when you get it going. So in the US, we've started to invite people from outside of the US to join in American kidney exchange. So the lady in yellow standing next to me here is this lady, and she and her cousin, who is not in the picture, as her donor, were able to take part in an American chain that started with an American woman and would have ended with an American woman being asked to donate to someone on the deceased donor waiting list who didn't have a living donor prepared to continue the chain. And the reason is that this is back in, I need a year here, it's back in 2011, and this woman was 67 years old. And at that time, American surgeons thought that 67-year-old donors were not that desirable. And many of us here can remember when we were 67 and we weren't old. So in particular, that kidney is thriving in Marisol Robles today, and the chain continued for some distance further. Okay, so more people got transplanted, and in particular, this Mexican lady, where there was no kidney exchange in Mexico, her life was saved. Okay, I got to go to the United Arab Emirates during COVID in 2021 for the first kidney exchange between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of obstacles to arranging that particular exchange. Okay, not just the medical obstacles for the three recipients, all of whom were mothers, not coincidentally. And the reason it's not coincidental is one of the ways a person can become exposed to human proteins, human antigens, and develop antibodies to them is during childbirth. So if during childbirth a mother becomes exposed to the proteins that the babies have from the father, the paternal antigens, then it can be that she'll be incompatible with a kidney from the father or from the children. And the UAE and Israel just have populations of 10 million. So when you start having highly sensitized patients, you can't find matches for all of them. Incidentally, we can't find matches for all the American patients, and we have over 300 million people in the US. People can be very highly sensitized. But in this case, we were able to do a three-way exchange between the UAE and Israel. And so that gives me a lot of hope for kidney exchanges as having room to grow in ways that will be good for people in a lot of ways. So in particular, the fact that the UAE and Israel were able to overcome their difficulties in having a joint exchange gives me hope that one day the US and Canada will be able to overcome our difficulties. It turns out the red here, this is a Canadian graph, and the red shows the growth of highly sensitized patients, hard to match pairs. And Canada has only about the population as California. So it would make a lot of sense and not be it would be good for US patients and good for Canadian patients to have a thicker market so that people who have trouble finding a compatible donor in their domestic pool can find one in the joint pool. But so far, because of bureaucratic reasons mostly, we haven't been able to merge the US and Canadian kidney exchange pairs. Okay, so my hope for the US is, that one day the US and Canada will be able to cooperate. And my hope for Taiwan is that there's already successful transplantation in Taiwan, both of kidneys and of livers, but it has a lot of limitations in it, and I would like to see some of those limitations. I would hope to see some of those limitations relaxed so that more Taiwanese patients could get kidneys. And eventually, I could imagine building cooperative kidney exchange with hospitals in the People's Republic of China, because remember, they're number 2 in total transplants in the world. They still don't do any kidney exchange, but Taiwan could lead the way in cooperating, building a kind of peaceful cooperation between Taiwan and the mainland along the lines of the much smaller populations in the UAE and Israel. So that's, the hope that I want to leave you with. And thank you.
Thank you, Professor Roth, for the inspiring and insightful lecture. May we invite Professor Roth to return to his seat? We will now have 10 minutes break before the Q&A session begins. The Q&A session will be conducted via Slido. Please scan the QR code to submit the question and upload those you find most interesting.
本场演讲的 Q&A 提问将使用 Slido 平台进行，请各位与会者扫描现场提供的 QR code， 即可进入提问页面，提出您的问题或对其他问题进行按赞。我们现在休息时间到35分，请各位3:05分，不好意思。
Now we have a break time until 3 o'clock and 5 minutes. Thank you.
Our break time is ending within 2 minutes. Please return back to your seat. Thank you for your cooperation. 我们的休息时间剩下2分钟，请您回到您的座位上，谢谢您的配合。
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Welcome back. Before the Q&A session begins, we would like to give a special thanks to Academia Sinica, TSMC, and various universities and corporate for their generous sponsorship. We now open the floor for Q&A session. We have also prepared a selection of questions submitted in advance by participants during online registration.
Okay, great. I would like to thank everyone for being with us, and we have been able to learn a lot from Professor Roth. And now it's time to, in fact, we have solicited some questions earlier, and of course you are welcome to key in your question. I will try my best to summarize your question into one and to see if we have time for Professor Roth to give you. And but before that, let me first introduce Professor Tianji Chen from Taipei School of Economics and Political Science. And so, Professor Chen, do you want to share some thoughts and some comment with Professor Roth?
Yeah, thank you. I would just like to take the opportunity to thank Professor Roth for giving really excellent speech to our students. Many of our students from TSC are present here. I would just take this opportunity to ask a question which Professor didn't have a time to touch, but I think it's very important for us. In addition to the kidney exchange and maybe the university entrance mentioned, all these are very relevant for Taiwan's policy. But the other thing is marriage. I understand that you have done, I've read many of your papers on marriage. And then with the situation this country is facing now, as you has alluded in many of your papers, that the age of marriage, the time that people get married, kind of keep postponing. It used to be 22, but now 26, but now it's all over 30. I think the men will marry on average at the age of 32. Women is about 28. So that naturally will give a very low fertility rate after the marriage. So some people will even sort of give up on the marriage when they get out of university as a PhD. by the age you're 39, and they probably think about sort of just giving up this option and focus their life. So it is a very serious problem because of the fertility rate and then all these demographic issues. So could you just briefly comment on that and maybe what kind of thing we should think about reversing this very serious problem?
So of course, first I should emphasize that I'm not expert on the situation in Taiwan. But problems like this are, well, this phenomenon of increased age of marriage is, we're seeing it around the world. And partly it has to do with increased participation in the labor market of women. And, so the question of organizing careers and family is a complicated one. And my colleague, Claudia Golden, who just won the Nobel Prize in Economics. Claudia Golden teaches at Harvard. One of her takes on the subject is that it's a problem for women of distinguishing between what she calls dads and duds. And what she means by that is not all the cultural norms have shifted together with the increased participation of women in the labor force and focus on careers. And so that a disproportionate share of work in the home and of raising children still falls on women, even when they have careers of their own. And Claudia's analysis of the problem is that if men had already evolved to the point of being able to take a larger role in household production, that there'd be less of a problem in getting marriages.
So we have received some questions. I think one of the common one is actually about the efficiency and the fairness. And your kidney exchange program apparently both have been achieved. But how about school admission, like a college admission things? And as an economist, how would you recommend to solve between efficiency and fairness, especially like ethical issues involved?
Okay, so markets to work well need social support. And if for no reason other than that, and that's not the only reason, but for no reason other than that, therefore, fairness is very important, right? Not just efficiency by many measures. And in a place like Taiwan, where you have, for college admissions, where you have a national exam, I understand, that in many ways speaks to fairness issues. People who do well on the exam do better in college admissions. On the other hand, there's almost surely a correlation between exam preparedness and socioeconomic status. So people from wealthy families will be more likely to do well on the college exams, and people from big cities probably have more access to preparation for the exams. So even with a meritocratic system like an exam, which yields quantitative measures, there can still be problems of fairness, which is, when you look at who ends up in which colleges and where. So we have these problems in the United States too. We don't have a national exam, but I teach at a fancy American university, and probably around half of our students come from the top fifth of the income distribution of families. So we worry about that. We don't have a great solution yet. Right now, American universities are under intense political attack. So there's also some self-examination going on about, do we deserve to be attacked? And some of the answer is that, maybe we should have more than a few percent of people from the lower quintiles of income, family income, among our students at the top universities. But we haven't figured out a way to do that because, by and large, students from poor families have gone to poor high schools. So I've been involved in trying to organize school choice in American cities. And part of the problem there is we worry that people who grow up in poor neighborhoods will be condemned to go to poor schools, using the word poor in 2 different ways there. And that contributes to intergenerational poverty, which is a problem that we haven't solved in the United States, but would like to. So trying to make the municipal school systems more transparent is meant to be a first step in getting more people from lower socioeconomic status families to be eligible to go to Harvard.
I think there's a question here about the kidney or organ exchange system. The question is really about the possibility of any strategic actions when people engage in this. If you have, for example, multiple exchange network rather than a single one, so any possibility people will play strategically, or the system will the system give any priority to particular patients in your design or experience there?
Well, incentives matter, and part of design is thinking about the incentives that people have. When I first started working with physicians and surgeons, we talked to them about incentives, and they said to us, "Professor," it's always a problem when they call you professor, "Professor, you don't understand, these people have a deadly disease. There's no question of incentives here." And we'd say, "Come now, your patients have, on waiting lists for deceased donor transplants, and different properties of their treatment and their disease make them eligible for transplants at different rapidity. Surely there's a way for you to manage the waiting list for your patients." And they would say, "Oh, of course." And we'd say, "That's what we mean by incentives." So by and large, we like doctors to be able to concentrate on their patients and not think about the whole national system all the time. We want that when you go to a doctor, you should be confident that he's thinking about you. But on the other hand, there have been constant jiggling of the priority system to try to deal with the fact that physicians have incentives to sometimes manage the treatment of their patients and the description of their patient's disease in ways that reflect into their priority for transplant. So, for instance, in the deceased donor heart transplant list, I have a student who now, an economics PhD, who's now at a medical school, who studied the priorities given to people for heart transplants. And like kidneys, there are not enough hearts for transplant. And in an effort to try to treat the sicker patients, the medical community changed the priorities so that people who were getting more intensive treatments, the kind that sicker patients used to get, got higher priority on the wait list. But one of the things that happened is more people started to get those intensive treatments when it yielded higher priority on the wait list. So that's a market design kind of question. That is, how do you target the patients without causing the doctors to start treating the wait list as well as the patient? So these are ongoing problems. I think that, like regulating any complicated system, you have to keep monitoring the system and see what's happening and try to fix flaws that develop.
In Tsinghua University, we recently established our medical school, and we are actually in shortage of cadaver donors, which means someone deceased and went to donate their bodies for medical research. And so I got this question. I think it's very matter for all of us. I wonder, what's your take, or do you have any advice in promoting the cadaver donation?
So, once again, I'm not familiar with the situation in Taiwan, but we have a very unusual situation in the United States, which is that, as I've already told you, donors cannot be paid for donating organs for transplantation, but people can be paid for donating cadavers for anatomy classes, right? So indeed, I think there are enough cadavers in American medical schools because apparently we can purchase them.
Yeah, it's kind of similar question here because the economics always talk about price, right? The incentive that coming from the price. So do you see these?
Chicago economists always talk about that.
So it's all this experiment. Is the price, long price, its price can play any useful role in your sort of design. That even if there's a some the moral issue that involved, even that can be sort of designed to help the things work, right?
Absolutely. So periodically, legislation is proposed in the United States that would allow us to be more generous to donors. So right now, there's a piece of legislation being sponsored in Congress that's called the End Kidney Deaths Act. It has a very ambitious name, but what it intends to do is to give an income tax credit over a period of 5 years or 10 years, I forget, to non-directed donors, to the people I told you about who start these long chains. And I would like to see that happen. In other words, as an experiment, we could start to see whether that increased the number of non-directed donors. There's only 500 a year of them, so we're not talking about a big expense in any way. And if it would increase the number of non-directed donors, that would increase the number of transplants. And we could start to think about maybe there are other ways we could be generous to donors to make it easier for people to donate. Because there's a big shortage of transplantable kidneys and millions of deaths because of that. So it's not my idea that we shouldn't use prices. It's clear that we have to be careful about that. One thing you really wouldn't like to see is that rich people buying kidneys from poor people and making kidney transplant unaffordable to poor people. But you could start to think about changing the law so that, say, only the federal government could pay donors and that they would treat the organs recovered in that manner as national resources that would be allocated by medical need, the way we now allocate the very scarce resources that we have. So, so economists tend not to be offended by using prices.
We know we are living in an unusual world now, and Professor Roth's research helped us to address like potential way of political conflict, and hopefully love will surpass hate throughout the world. And so one question is asking you, how do you conquer those kind of political conflict? Or can you explain some ways to conquer this kind of political conflict between two countries, especially in your Israel and the UAE cases, which hopefully can give us some inspiration?
Well, I think the habit of cooperation helps mediate conflict. So I understand there's lots of tension between Taiwan and the People's Republic, but I can imagine that it might be possible to make agreements among hospitals that would start to have cooperation in transplantation. Just recently, there's begun cooperation in transplantation between the People's Republic and Hong Kong for deceased donor organs. And it's controversial there. So actually some organs, the first transplant I know about was of a pediatric heart that originated in the mainland and came to Hong Kong. But that caused many people in Hong Kong to worry that if the two systems were merged, then all the organs donated in Hong Kong would go to the People's Republic. But I think that's a mistake, because there are really a lot more organs in the People's Republic than there are in Hong Kong. So I think that those kinds of cooperation, you could imagine. That's why I said I would hope to see, wouldn't it be wonderful to see kidney exchange across the strait? Because once you start helping save each other's lives, it might be harder to fight.
I think we also got another very good question. I think it's very meaningful, so I'm going to share it. It's like an undergrad student is asking you, he or she apparently admire your achievement, especially your contribution to the social welfare, and he or she is asking, if he is just a college student, like how could he or she do now and to make that kind of contribution at the end of his or her life? Or like in your background, right, you study operational research, but eventually you kind of master this area methodology and apply it to real world questions. And what's the trajectory can be shared with students?
Okay, well, the first part of the answer is easy. If you're a college student now, study hard. But you have to decide what to study, and eventually, if you decide to go on and get more degrees and things like that, you have to think about what you want to study. And to have a So I advise many PhD students, and one of the things I tell them is you have to first of all pick problems that are important enough to be interesting to you over a long period of time. But it's not enough to pick problems that are important. You have to, and whose solution is interesting to you. You also have to pick problems where the methods of solving them appeal to you so that you enjoy coming to work. Because if you don't enjoy doing the work, you won't be able to work hard enough. So you have to find things that you think are worth doing and that you like doing.
Very important area of research that economy seems to not discovered before. You were saying that you were interested in matching. So that's the subject itself, I think, is very critical. Yeah, I'm just saying that, during a lunch conversation that professor has shared his experience of how he got into this area of very important research. As an economist, I would imagine that most of our applications will happen in.
Is it working? Okay. At least mine is working. Okay.
This game theory and the matching theories really work wonders in the medical practices, and that saved many lives. I think that's the really tremendous contribution to human society. So this is how the idea and how the theory itself, can really work wonders. So that's I think the inspiration that we all got today from his speech.
How are we doing in terms of time? Or some more questions? Oh, yeah. Then maybe let me ask you the final one. Is about how to balance between academic research and the real-world applications. Apparently, you have excelled on both areas, but like in the mid part of your career, like what made you decide to allocate sufficient part of time and in applying your methodology to the real world? And maybe that's helpful to all our students, right? When they study hard today, they know, what kind of mathematics engineering are studying now can be applied to future problems.
So it's hard to give advice of that sort. In my career, I got my PhD in 1974, and I'm aware that the 7 makes it seem that was a long time ago. But I didn't start to do market design until my phone rang one day at the University of Pittsburgh in 1995. So before that, when I speak of market design, I use the word design in 2 different ways. What I talk to you about today is design as a verb. I've helped design some markets. But design is also a noun. Markets have some designs. And what I had done prior to 1995 is study the designs of many markets. And one of them was the medical labor market. So one day my phone rang and they were having a crisis and they asked me to redesign the marketplace. So I didn't hurry to change the world. And maybe that's a good model, maybe it isn't. But it took a long time before I felt I knew enough about this problem so that I could help fix it.
There don't seem to be more questions on the web. I wonder whether professors on the floor would like to raise any questions and take the opportunity that we still in.
Thank you so much, Professor Roth, for your insights. And as a lawyer, certainly part of my brain has been opened. And so this may sound a little bit lawyer's questions, but let me put it in this way. Further to the question raised by Paul, how to promote the donation. That one legal issue is about the choices between opt-in and opt-out. That I know it's more relevant to the deceased donor rather than the living donor, I think. But so the idea is that perhaps the government can, I don't know, require an active consent or to register into the system, or the government can assume the willingness to donate unless choose otherwise. So, what are your views about what kind of rules, regulations may be helpful to support the system, to strike balance between protection and flexibility?
Okay. So that's a great question. Let me enlarge on it for those of you who didn't understand what was being spoken about. In the United States, we have what's called an opt-in system to be a deceased donor. On my driver's license, there's a little red heart which indicates that when I got my driver's license, I indicated that in case I should die in a way that made my organs available for transplantation, I wish to be a donor. And that's called opt-in. If I hadn't said that when I got my driver's license, then I wouldn't be on that list. Nevertheless, if someone dies who is not on the list, their next of kin has the opportunity to donate their organs. Another way to, and incidentally, even if someone is on the list in the United States, by and large, we require the consent of the next of kin before organs can be donated. Now, some other countries have adopted what's called an opt-out system. That is, when you get your driver's license or whenever the opportunity is to answer this question, it's assumed that you will be willing to be a deceased donor unless you take an active measure and say, no, I don't want to be a deceased donor. Now, whether those two systems are very different turns out to depend a lot on whether family consent is required. So if family consent is required, my understanding of the current data is that opt-in and opt-out change the enrollment on the registration of the deceased donor list, but don't change the transplants very much. And the reason is that in the United States, where we have an opt-in system, when someone has opted in, the next of kin almost always agree to donate the organs. But in opt-out systems, and that's because if you've opted in, your next of kin know that you wish to donate your organs when you died. But in opt-out systems, the registration, the agreement by the next of kin is much less, because in the opt-out system, they don't know what was the intention of the donor. Did you just forget to opt out, or are you on the list because you wanted to donate? So in countries where family consent is required, different countries have very different donation rates, but when you look at the ones that change from opt-in to opt-out, if family consent is required, it doesn't change things very much. Now, there are countries like Singapore where family consent is not required. They have a very muscular government, and they are able to recover organs over the objection of next of kin, and of course they are able to do that. I said during my talk that markets require social support to work well, and that interacts in surprisingly powerful ways with this opt-in, opt-out distinction.
Okay, great. I would like to thank everyone for all your questions, and then indeed, like 2 or 3 questions about human misbehaviors or irrationality, right? And how does that kind of irrationality affect your market design, and how do you conquer that both theoretically and empirically in a mechanism design? And would you want to share some?
Well, so let me answer by giving an example that I think is not what you had in mind. It's easy and convenient in many economic models to model people as selfish. Just not because we think people are selfish, but because that's an easy thing to do. You say, how much money does everyone get in each situation? And they're trying to maximize the amount of money. Donating a kidney is costly, not in money necessarily, but in, you go through an operation. So one of the things we worried about when we started to have non-simultaneous chains of kidney donation is whether if on Tuesday your sister, who you wanted to give a kidney to, but you weren't able to, but she gets a kidney from someone else, when Thursday comes around, will you still be willing to give a kidney, or will you have changed your mind? And it turns out very, very few people change their mind. So one way to think about that is human beings are quite a bit nicer and more reliable than economists normally give us credit for. And, a deal's a deal. Once your sister gets a kidney, you feel obliged to continue the gift. Turns out it's not quite that simple. Not everyone in a non-simultaneous chain is part of a non-simultaneous segment of the chain, right? Some surgeries happen at the same time in groups of 2 or 3, and some people are delayed. It turns out the nurses have to think you're reliable before you're nominated to be someone who can wait after your patient has gotten a kidney and be relied on to give a kidney, further, to pay it forward. But nevertheless, the renege rate on kidney donation in this kind of environment is less than 2%. So the average chain that begins with a non-directed donor has 10 people in the picture. So even with some small amount of rational reneging, mostly human beings are more reliable than that. So that's a case where built into the design of kidney donation, kidney exchange chains, is the idea that people will do what they're supposed to do, even when it might seem to be in their immediate self-interest not to do so.
Yeah. And the one more important question I got shared by 2 or 3 is that we all know AI, right? As you show us today about the use or misuse of AI, and what's your perspective about the use of AI and how AI reshape our research career, especially now it turns out some AI can solve mathematical problem like MP hard, that kind of thing. I mean, hopefully one day. And so what's your overall take of AI, and what's the future in your mind?
The future is the hardest thing to predict. I'm a techno-optimist. I mean, in the long term, and that the phrase long term is going to carry a lot of weight in what I'm about to say. In the long term, I'm an optimist. I think that when you look at the long span of human history, human beings are living longer, healthier lives than we used to, even 100 years ago. And of course, a lot of labor market churning has gone on in that time. In 1900, half of the American labor force worked in agriculture, and today it's only 2%. So a lot of great jobs went away, and we don't miss those jobs. When it's raining, we work indoors now, which is fine. But in the short term, the disruption was pretty severe. A lot of people were displaced from their professions by the mechanization of agriculture. And the same thing can be said about the replacement of horse and buggy with internal combustion engines, and with the replacement of brick and mortar stores with internet commerce. So I anticipate that there are going to be some bumps on the road as we figure out how to use artificial intelligence. But I'm optimistic that we'll like it once we get used to it. Now, also though, its shiny uses, the things we hope it will do, may not come as smoothly as we expect. Think about things like email. When email was first created, it was lovely to send and receive emails from people you knew. And then advertisers figured out that they could send you spam email. And today, most of the email traffic that we don't see because of spam filters has been, is spam email. So people learn to attack through the email, and now we've learned to defend through the email, and the attacks come first. So I imagine that we're going to see some malign applications of artificial intelligence, and those will be painful, and we'll have to learn to adapt and defend.
I noticed there's a question, can the kidney situation apply to surrogate? So I think maybe you'd like to take it. Surrogate. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a book coming out in May called Moral Economics. What controversial transactions teach us about markets? And I got into this through my work in kidney transplants because you can't pay for a kidney and we have a terrible shortage of kidneys. And there are other things that in some places you can't pay for or do at all, and other places you can. And surrogacy is a good example. Surrogacy is legal in maybe all but one American states. I think Louisiana may still have a law against surrogacy. But that means that if you're trying to start a family and you're not fertile between you, you can come to California and you can be the intended parents of a surrogate baby, and the California birth certificate will have the intended couple's name on the California birth certificate. On the other hand, here in Taiwan, surrogacy is not legal. And at least until recently, even in vitro fertilization was regulated to only be between married couples, things like that. But one of the things about markets needing social support to work well is bans on markets also need social support to work well. And so banning something in Taiwan that's legal in California means there are going to be babies. And if you ban surrogacy in Taiwan, it doesn't mean that there won't be any surrogate babies born to Taiwanese parents. And often the laws against something like surrogacy are made in an attempt to protect vulnerable people. And the thought of people who make laws against surrogacy is that the vulnerable people who we're protecting are the women who might be surrogate mothers, might be the bearers of the surrogate children. But of course, if the ban doesn't work perfectly, then there will be babies, and no one is more vulnerable than a baby. So in the countries that completely ban surrogacy, like many of the countries of Western Europe, they've had to come to terms with what to do with the babies, to where should this baby go home? This baby who was born in violation of the German law or the French law or the Spanish law against surrogacy. And the family courts often reach the conclusion that the baby should go home with her parents. That's a good place for babies. And so so although surrogacy is banned, they find ways to allow the parents to adopt their baby. So this question of what's allowed and what isn't allowed is a complicated question, but it's related to the question of what you can accomplish and what you can ban effectively and what things you can't ban effectively. So, I'm not here to tell you what's the right thing to want, but it's very hard to ban surrogacy when it's legal in the United States. Okay, so, and it was legal in Ukraine, which is now out of the market because of the war, but it's legal in other places in the world as well. So that's my first thought on surrogacy, is that when we try to regulate things or to ban things, we have to think not just what's the intent of our policy, but what are the consequences.
Allow the organ trading, right? Can you explain a little bit about the background of the very unique sort of regulation in that country?
Okay. Well, so remember, it's not just markets that need social support, but bans on markets. And in most of the world, it's against the law to pay a donor for a kidney. But there are black markets. And the black markets often work outside of the traditional medical institutions, outside of hospitals. So some of the black markets are very dire. That is, they're doing nephrectomies, surgical removal of kidneys, and transplants, surgical placement of kidneys, outside of hospitals. So when I was in the UAE, I talked to nephrologists who said before there were these laws against paying for kidneys, some of their patients used to go to Pakistan and come back with a transplant. And they assumed that their patient paid for a kidney in Pakistan. But they came back from a recognized Pakistani hospital with a full report of what had happened and of the donor, and their treatment when they got back to the UAE could be seamlessly continued. They said after it became illegal in most of the world to buy kidneys, some of their patients still went to Pakistan. And now they came back with a kidney, but with no medical report, and often with opportunistic infections, which is sometimes potentially lethal diseases. So that they were still going to Pakistan, but that it was hard to continue their treatment because they were much sicker when they came back than they used to be when they were in hospitals. So you ask about Iran, and again, you know, it's over my pay scale to tell you what the laws should be, but in Iran, all the nephrectomies and all the transplants are conducted in real hospitals, in world-class hospitals, and people get fine treatment from all accounts. So for some people, many people in the transplant business and related, they think it's a bad thing. It's simply a bad thing to pay for kidneys. But other people, and I would count myself among them, that think that what's really a bad thing is to have kidney transplants going on outside of hospitals. So I think there's a lot to be learned from Iran in that category.
I received like 2 or 3 questions about internationalization and globalization. It used to be like we have some UN or international organization which can be in charge of this kind of cross-border collaboration. But due to current situation, we also see the fail out or like weaken the roles of those organizations. And I guess their common theme is ask you about in your market design, in both theory and the practice, like what's the role of this kind of international organization, and what's your expectation for the involvement of those organizations in the long run? Hopefully the world will get more peaceful in the future.
Also, that's a tough question because international organizations sometimes take positions that I approve of, and sometimes they take positions I don't approve of. So I was just in, Emily and I were just in Cairo, Egypt, for a consensus conference on international cooperation in transplantation. And the World Health Organization, an international organization, not only don't they like payment to donors, they really don't like that, they also have for a long time argued that countries should be self-sufficient in transplantation. And to an economist, that's a very odd position because, as I already told you, I think it's a great thing that the UAE and Israel cooperate on transplantation because they're each too small to do it by themselves. And we don't, in general, require countries to be self-sufficient in just about anything, right? So when there's COVID, we don't say to countries, you really ought to have a domestic pharmaceutical industry to make vaccines for you. You're allowed to import vaccines from countries that have pharmaceutical industries. When it's winter in the United States, we now eat fruit from Chile where it's summer. So there are problems with globalization, that, right? Global markets need designs the same as other markets do, but there are enormous benefits to globalization, to international trade. So in Cairo, for my sins, I was asked to chair a working group on international cooperation in transplantation, and we tried to reach something that's often done in medical circles. We tried to reach a consensus statements on what we thought we should do going forward. And we reached consensus that kidney exchange was something that countries should be encouraged to cooperate across their borders. Now, we think, so we're in the process of writing up those papers, and we're hoping to have a paper that has 100 authors, that says that. And we're hopeful that the World Health Organization will come along with us and make it easier for countries to cooperate. But because in the past, they've somewhat been an obstacle. And a somewhat related story is for blood plasma, right? Many countries have laws against paying blood and plasma donors. But plasma, the World Health Organization classifies plasma as an essential set of pharmaceuticals. If you want to form a hospital anywhere in the world, you should have the WHO essential pharmaceuticals in your pharmacy. But the World Health Organization also thinks that countries should be self-sufficient in unpaid plasma donation, and no countries that only have unpaid donation are self-sufficient. But it turns out that the United States, where plasma donors can be paid, exports tens of billions of dollars a year of plasma products, and that's why there's no shortage of these essential medicines. So that's a case where, again, changing some of the international edicts might be helpful.
Yeah, Professor, have you really, I know you're down back to really serious research now. So is there a new area that you are now exploring that outside of the work such as medical? Are there other fields you think you're going to devote some of your time now to work on that, or encourage sort of young scholars to maybe join this research?
Okay, that's a good question. I told you about one of my books, the book from 2015, Who Gets What? And now I've told you a little bit about my book on moral economics. And one difference between those two books is the first book was an optimistic, cheerful book about sometimes markets are broken and we can fix them. And the second one is a much less optimistic book, which says sometimes markets are broken for surrogacy, for blood plasma, for kidneys, but it's hard to fix them because we can't agree on the dimensions in which they're broken. We don't agree on what we want them to do. They're tools, but we don't agree on how we want to employ those tools. But there are certainly matching markets that are broken, and that doesn't mean that they're ripe for redesign. But one of the big matching markets that's broken is the matching market for human migration, right? For refugees and for economic migrants, for people fleeing from famines and wars and rising sea levels. And right now, we do a very bad job of that. It's a matching market because with all the barriers to immigration that are going up, you can't just choose where you want to live. But neither, with all the permeability we see of borders, neither can you choose who will come and live in your country. So, and people are putting their families on small boats in the Mediterranean. These are terribly dangerous ways to try to immigrate. That's not the way we travel. If you ever want to go to Italy, you'll take an airplane and you'll get off with your feet dry. But if you're a refugee from Eritrea, you find yourself in Egypt trying to deal with people smugglers to get to Italy on a small boat. So that's a market that's not working well. And it's a matching market, and it's a market that many of you in your generation are going to have to come to some terms with, especially if the climate continues to get warmer and the sea level continues to rise. There's going to be lots more human migration that we have to learn how to deal with equitably and efficiently.
That will be the country or short of population, or short of young people. That maybe maybe a possibility to get a matching partner. And
there's still work to do. We haven't solved all the problems yet. You guys should feel comfortable that there'll be good work for you to do.
Because I have also been working on sustainable finance economics, especially like the carbon pricing or emission, right? Those kind of things. The quota. I wonder, have you tried those kind of market design? Is there still any obvious matching problem which can be solved in this kind of carbon pricing? Because in Taiwan, we recently just adopted the carbon price, I think, last year. But apparently, this kind of pricing hasn't been imposed in the United States and many other places. What's your take on this?
Well, economists love carbon pricing.
Yes.
And the reason, of course, is that it's a way of getting around all the detailed coordination that's otherwise needed for climate change. If you can just price in carbon, then every place where it's used will become more expensive. It'll be natural to look for renewable resources. There's some chance that this current war in Iran is going to be effectively a tax on carbon. So we'll see what happens. Maybe the outcomes will not be all bad.
We have basically solved most of the questions we received, and let's give another big round of applause to Professor Roth and all of us.
Thank you, Professor Roth, Professor Xu, and Professor Chen for the engaging discussion. We would now like to invite our Dean, Xin Yinpeng, to join on stage for a group photo. We extend our greatest gratitude to our distinguished deans and professors for their invaluable insights. We now kindly invite you to return to your seats. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the keynote speech by Professor Roth, 2012 Nobel Laureate in Economic Sciences, hosted by National Tsinghua University. Thank you very much for your participation. We wish you all a wonderful day.